Hello, friends. If this joke tickled your funny bone, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's an easy way to keep the humor flowing into your feed. Don't miss the last one. That is special joke for you.
A man walks into the barber shop, sits down in the chair, and the barber asks, "How do you want your hair cut?" The man says, "Now, I would like the sideburns one high and one low, a few long hairs sticking out of the back, and a few chunks on the side and top." The barber looks puzzled and says, "I'm not sure I can do that." The customer says, "Why not? You did it that way last time." On the first day of spring training, a baseball scout brings a racehorse with him to add to the starting lineup. The coach asks, "What did you bring that horse here for?" The scout replies, "Wait until you see him bat." All the players are laughing until the horse comes to bat. At this point, the horse grabs the bat, and everyone quiets down. They stare at the horse. The pitcher just shrugs his shoulders and throws the ball toward home plate, when astonishingly the horse hits the ball deep in the outfield. The horse just stands there and does not move. The manager then yells at the baseball scout to tell the horse to run to first base. The scout looks back at the manager and yells back, "If he could run, he'd be at Belmont." During weekly visits to my allergist, I've noticed a lot of inattentive parents with ill-behaved children in the waiting room. So I was impressed one day to see a mother with her little boy, helping him sound out the words on a sign. Finally, he mastered it, and his mother cheered, "That's great! Now sit there. I'll be back in 15 minutes. What did the sign say? Children must not be left unattended. On New Year's Eve, Daniel was in no shape to drive, so he sensibly left his van in the car park and walked home. As he was wobbling along, he was stopped by a policeman. "What are you doing out here at 4 o'clock in the morning?" asked the police officer. "I'm on my way to a lecture," answered Daniel. "And who on earth, in their right mind, is going to give a lecture at this time on New Year's Eve?" inquired the constable sarcastically. "My wife," slurred Daniel grimly. "Preparing my son for his first day of kindergarten, we were reviewing numbers and counting. Suddenly he asked, 'What is the biggest number in the world?' As briefly as possible, I tried to explain the concept of infinity. I thought I had done pretty well, but then he said, 'Dad, what number comes just before infinity?' 'I've never flown before,' said the nervous old lady to the pilot. 'You will bring me down safely, won't you?' 'All I can say, ma'am,' said the pilot, "is that I've never left anyone up there yet." The farmer's son was returning from the market with the crate of chickens his father had entrusted to him, when all of a sudden the box fell and broke open. Chickens scurried off in different directions, but the determined boy walked all over the neighborhood, scooping up the wayward birds and returning them to the repaired crate. Hoping he had found them all, the boy reluctantly returned home, expecting the worst. "Pa, the chickens got loose," the boy confessed sadly, "but I managed to find all 12 of them." "Well, you did real good, son," the farmer beamed. "You left with 7. My older son loves school, but his younger brother absolutely hates it. One weekend he cried and fretted and tried every excuse not to go back on Monday. Sunday morning on the way home from church, the crying and whining built to a crescendo. At the end of my rope, I finally stopped the car and explained, "Honey, it's a law. If you don't go to school, they'll put Mommy in jail." He looked at me, thought a moment, then asked, "How long would you have to stay?" Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Dilbert, Dogbert, Garfield, John Arbuckle, and a whole lot of comic strip characters and their pets were on an airplane flying from Miami to Los Angeles. In the middle of the flight attendant gave out food to everyone but Charlie Brown and Snoopy. They asked him why everyone else got some food and they didn't. The flight attendant said, "Sorry, but we don't serve peanuts on this flight." A first grader came to the ophthalmology office where I work to have his vision checked. He sat down and I turned off the lights. Then I switched on a projector that flashed the letters F, Z, and B on a screen. I asked the boy what he saw. Without hesitation, he replied, "Consonants." 80-year-old Bessie bursts into the recreation room of the retirement home. She holds her clenched fist in the air and announces, "Anyone who can guess what's in my hand can take me out to dinner tonight." A witty, elderly gentleman in the rear shouts out, "An elephant?" Bessie thinks a minute and replies, "Close enough." A husband is having a beer at the pub with his friends when he sends an email to his wife. "What are you emailing her?" asked one. He reads his message out loud. "Having a beer with the boys. If I'm not home in 20 minutes, read this email again." "Daddy," said my 10-year-old daughter, "I think I want to join the army." "Baby," I answered, "I think the Air Force would be a better option for you. But I don't want to be a pilot." "You don't have to be a pilot," I told her. "There are other jobs in the Air Force." Her answer was, "I don't want to be a flight attendant either." When Bob found out he was going to inherit a fortune when his sickly father died, he decided he needed a woman to enjoy it with. So one evening he went to a singles bar where he spotted the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her natural beauty took his breath away. "I may look like just an ordinary man," he said as he walked up to her, "but in just a week or two, my father will die, and I'll inherit $20 million. Impressed, the woman went home with him that evening. 3 days later, she became his stepmother. A plane was taking off from Kennedy Airport. After it reached a comfortable cruising altitude, the captain made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome to flight number 398, non-stop from New York to Los Angeles. The weather ahead is good, and therefore we should have a smooth and uneventful flight. Now sit back and relax. Oh my God!" Silence. Then the captain came back on the intercom and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry if I scared you earlier, but while I was talking, the flight attendant brought me a cup of coffee and spilled the hot coffee in my lap. You should see the front of my pants." A passenger in the coach said, "That's nothing. He should see the back of mine." A newly minted blonde woman doctor was eager to start her practice and help her patients. One day, an elderly man walked into her clinic, limping and wincing in pain. "Doctor," he groaned, "my legs have been hurting so much lately. The pain is unbearable." The blonde doctor, full of enthusiasm, smiled warmly and said, "Don't worry, I've got just the thing to help you." She walked over to him, placed a chair nearby, and said, "Please, have a seat." The elderly man, grateful for her kindness, sat down slowly. The doctor then knelt down, gently placed her hands on his legs, and started massaging them. There," she said soothingly. "I'll make sure you feel better in no time." The elderly man looked a bit surprised, but decided to go along with it. After a few minutes of the doctor's diligent massaging, he finally spoke up. "Doctor, I appreciate the effort, but I actually came in to see my grandson, Bob, who works here. He's the one I need to talk to." This 85-year-old couple, having been married almost 60 years, had died in a car crash. They had been in good health the last 10 years, mainly due to her interest in health food and exercise. When they reached the pearly gates, St. Peter took them to their mansion, which was decked out with a beautiful kitchen, master bath suite, and jacuzzi. As they oohed and awed, the old man asked Peter how much all this was going to cost. "It's free," Peter replied. "This is heaven." Next, they went out back to survey the championship golf course that the home backed up to. They would have golfing privileges every day, and each week the course changed to a new one, representing the great golf courses on Earth. The old man asked, "What are the green fees?" Peter's reply, "This is heaven, you play for free." Next, they went to the clubhouse and saw the lavish buffet lunch with the cuisines of the world laid out. "How much to eat?" asked the old man. "Don't you understand yet? This is heaven. It is free," Peter replied with some frustration. "Well, where are the low-fat and low-cholesterol tables?" the old man asked timidly. Peter lectured. "That's the best part. You can eat as much as you like of whatever you like, and you never get fat, and you never get sick. This is heaven." With that, the old man went into a fit of anger, throwing down his hat, stomping on it, and shrieking wildly. Peter and his wife both tried to calm him down, asking him what was wrong. The old man looked at his wife and said, "This is all your fault. If it weren't for your blasted bran muffins, I could have been here 10 years ago." 11 people were hanging on a rope under a helicopter, 10 men and 1 woman. The rope was not strong enough to carry them all, so they decided that one has to drop off, otherwise they are all going to fall. They were not able to choose that person, but then the woman made a very touching speech. She said that she would voluntarily let go of the rope because, as a woman, she was used to giving up everything for her husband and kids and for men in general without ever getting anything in return. As soon as she finished her speech, all the men started clapping their hands. A preacher goes to a nursing home to meet an elderly parishioner. As he is sitting there, he notices this bowl of peanuts beside her bed and takes one. As they talk, he can't help himself and eats one after another. By the time they are through talking, the bowl is empty. He says, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I seem to have eaten all of your peanuts." "That's okay," she says. "They would have just sat there. Without my teeth, all I can do is suck the chocolate off and put them back." Looking down at his patient, the doctor decided to tell him the truth. "I feel that I must tell you, you are a very sick man. I'm sure you would want to know the facts. I don't think you have much time left. Now, is there anyone you would like to see?" Bending down toward the sick man, the doctor heard him softly answer, "Yes. Who is it?" In a little stronger tone, the patient said, "Another doctor. 4 retired ladies are playing bridge." One of them looks across at her partner and says, "I know we've been playing bridge every week for 2 years, but I can't remember your name. Could you please tell me again?" Her partner looks at her for a long moment and finally replies, "How soon do you need to know?" An elderly couple was attending church services. About halfway through, she leans over and says to her husband, "I just let out a silent fart. What do you think I should do?" He replies, "Put a new battery in your hearing aid." An elderly gentleman was invited to his old friend's home for dinner one evening. He was impressed by the way his buddy addressed his wife with endearing terms, calling her honey, my love, darling, sweetheart, pumpkin, etc. The couple had been married almost 70 years, and they appeared still very clearly in love. While the wife was off in the kitchen, the man leaned over and said to his buddy, "I think it's wonderful that after all the years you've been married, you still call your wife those loving pet names." The old man hung his head. "I have to tell you the truth," he said. "I forgot her name about 10 years ago." A year ago, when the northern lights were especially bright, a young man went out late one night, saw them, and thought it was the end of time. He rushed down through the community, trying to wake people up. He came to the house of an old man and started pounding on his door, yelling, "Get up! The day of judgment has come." The old man yelled back, "I will go back to bed." Who ever heard of the day of judgment coming in the middle of the night? A shy little 4-year-old came in to the dentist for his first cleaning and checkup. The hygienist tried to strike up a conversation but got no response. After the cleaning, the dentist was called in to do the final check. The dentist tried to strike up a conversation as well. "How old are you?" No response. The dentist then asked, "Don't you know how old you are?" Immediately 4 tiny fingers went up. "Oh," replied the dentist, "and do you know how old that is?" 4 little fingers went up once again. Continuing the effort to get a response, the dentist asked, "Can you talk?" The solemn little patient looked at him and asked, "Yes, and can you count?" My high school assignment was to ask a veteran about World War II. Since my father had served in the Philippines during the war, I chose him. After a few basic questions, I very gingerly asked, "Did you ever kill anyone?" Dad got quiet. Then, in a soft voice, he said, "Probably. I was the cook." One afternoon, 2 old friends, Bob and Dave, were sitting on a park bench catching up after years apart. They talked about everything under the sun, from their families to their jobs. But something kept catching Dave's attention. Every time a truck passed by on the nearby road, Bob would shiver visibly and look around, nervously. Finally, unable to contain his curiosity, Dave asked, "Bob, why do you shiver every time you see a truck? Are you cold or something?" Bob chuckled, though his eyes still darted towards the road. "No, it's not the cold, Dave," he said. "It's more of an instinctive reaction." Dave raised an eyebrow, even more intrigued. "What do you mean? Did something happen?" Bob sighed and leaned back on the bench. "Well, it's a long story," he began. "Years ago, my wife ran off with a truck driver, just up and left with him one day. Ever since then, every time I see a truck, I get this nervous shiver down my spine." Dave, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "I see. But that was years ago, right? Why do you still react like that?" Bob turned to him, a wry smile on his face, and replied, "It's not about the past, Dave. I shiver, because every time I see a truck, I'm terrified that the driver might be bringing her back." Patient in the ER at 0400 with no complaints. "I have been having chest pain for 4 months, but I am not having chest pain now. The reason I'm here now is because I heard that 4 a.m. is the best time to come because there are not that many people. Had a woman call 911 because she had DJ'd in the shower and got nervous. I got a frantic call from a woman who claimed she had overdosed and needed help immediately. We arrive on scene, and she hands us an empty mint container, saying she took them all. That night, she learned that you cannot overdose on mints. A man was driving along the highway when he saw 2 penguins standing on the hard shoulder. They looked lost, so he picked them up and put them in the back seat of his car. He then goes to the petrol station to fill up, and whilst he is there, the attendant notices the penguins in the back seat. He says to the man, "What are those 2 penguins doing in the back of your car?" The man says, "I found them on the road and they looked lost, so I picked them up." "You should take them to the zoo," replied the attendant. "What a good idea," said the man, and then he paid for his petrol and drove off. The next day, he went to the same petrol station, and the same attendant served him and noticed the penguins were still in the car. He says to the man, "I thought I told you to take them to the zoo." The man replies, "I did. They loved it. And now I'm going to take them to the movies." Bugs Bunny was shopping at the supermarket, and a sales assistant said to him, "If you can tell me what 19,866 times 10,543 is, we'll give you free carrots for life." Immediately, Bugs responded, 209,447,238. The sales assistant was astonished and asked, "How on earth did you do that?" Bugs replied, "If there's one thing rabbits are good at, it's multiplying." One bright afternoon in the local park, an elderly man was taking his usual stroll, enjoying the peaceful surroundings. As he passed by a row of trees, something unusual caught his eye. A lovely young blonde woman dressed in a loose, flowing dress was hanging upside down from a sturdy tree branch. Her long hair cascaded toward the ground, and her dress fluttered gently in the breeze. The sight was so unexpected that the old man stopped in his tracks, rubbing his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Curiosity got the better of him, and he walked closer to get a better look. As he approached, he couldn't help but ask, "What on earth are you doing up there?" The blonde woman, completely unbothered by her upside-down position, looked at the old man and smiled sweetly. "Oh, it's quite simple," she said matter-of-factly. "I took a headache pill earlier, but I'm hanging upside down to make sure the pill doesn't end up in my stomach." A blonde lady motorist was about 2 hours from San Diego when she was flagged down by a man whose truck had broken down. The man walked up to the car and asked, "Are you going to San Diego?" "Sure," answered the blonde. "Do you need a lift?" "Not for me. I'll be spending the next 3 hours fixing my truck. My problem is I've got 2 chimpanzees in the back that have to be taken to the San Diego Zoo. They're a bit stressed already, so I don't want to keep them on the road all day. Could you possibly take them to the zoo for me? I'll give you $100 for your trouble." "I'd be happy to," said the blonde. So the 2 chimpanzees were ushered into the back seat of the blonde's car and carefully strapped into their seat belts. Off they went. 5 hours later, the truck driver was driving through the heart of San Diego when suddenly he was horrified. There was the blonde walking down the street and holding hands with the 2 chimps, much to the amusement of a big crowd. With a screech of brakes, he pulled off the road and ran over to the blonde. "What in the world are you doing here?" he demanded. "I gave you $100 to take these chimpanzees to the zoo." "Yes, I know you did," said the blonde. "But we had money left over, so now we're going to SeaWorld." Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went camping. After a good meal, they lay down for the night and went to sleep. Some hours later, Holmes awoke and nudged his faithful friend. Holmes said, "Watson, look up and tell me what you see." Watson said, "I see a fantastic panorama of countless stars." Holmes, "And what does that tell you?" Watson pondered for a moment. "Astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Horologically, I deduce that the time is approximately 3:15. Theologically, I can see that God is all-powerful and that we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, I suspect that we will have a beautiful day tomorrow." "Why? What does it tell you, Holmes?" Holmes was silent for a moment, then spoke. "My good Watson, someone has stolen our tent." A Sunday school teacher was discussing the 10 Commandments with her 5- and 6-year-olds. After explaining the commandment to honor thy father and thy mother, she asked, "Is there a commandment that teaches us how to treat our brothers and sisters?" Without missing a beat, one little boy, the oldest of a family, answered, "Thou shalt not kill." Young King Arthur was ambushed and imprisoned by the monarch of a neighboring kingdom. The monarch could have killed him, but was moved by Arthur's youth and ideals. So the monarch offered him his freedom, as long as he could answer a very difficult question. Arthur would have a year to figure out the answer. And if, after a year, he still had no answer, he would be put to death. The question is, what do women really want? Such a question would perplex even the most knowledgeable man. And to young Arthur it seemed an impossible query. But since it was better than death, he accepted the monarch's proposition to have an answer by year's end. He returned to his kingdom and began to poll everyone. The princess, the priests, the wise men, and even the court jester. He spoke with everyone, but no one could give him a satisfactory answer. Many people advised him to consult the old witch, for only she would have the answer. But the price would be high, as the witch was famous throughout the kingdom for the exorbitant prices she charged. The last day of the year arrived, and Arthur had no choice but to talk to the witch. She agreed to answer the question, but he would have to agree to her price first. The old witch wanted to marry Sir Lancelot, the most noble of the Knights of the Round Table and Arthur's closest friend. Young Arthur was horrified. She was hunchbacked and hideous, had only one tooth, smelled like sewage, made obscene noises, etc. He had never encountered such a repugnant creature in all his life. He refused to force his friend to marry her and endure such a terrible burden. But Lancelot, learning of the proposal, spoke with Arthur. He said nothing was too big of a sacrifice compared to Arthur's life and the preservation of the Round Table. Hence a wedding was proclaimed, and the witch answered Arthur's question thus. "What a woman really wants," she answered, "is to be in charge of her own life." Everyone in the kingdom instantly knew that the witch had uttered a great truth, and that Arthur's life would be spared. And so it was. The neighboring monarch granted Arthur his freedom, and Lancelot and the witch had a wonderful wedding. The honeymoon hour approached, and Lancelot, steeling himself for a horrific experience, entered the bedroom. But what a sight awaited him! The most beautiful woman he had ever seen lay before him on the bed. The astounded Lancelot asked what had happened. The beau replied that since he had been so kind to her when she appeared as a witch, she would henceforth be her horrible, deformed self only half the time, and the beautiful maiden the other half. Which would he prefer? Beautiful during the day or night? Lancelot pondered the situation. During the day, a beautiful woman to show off to his friends, but at night, in the privacy of his castle, an old witch. Or would he prefer having a hideous witch during the day, but by night a beautiful woman for him to enjoy wondrous, intimate moments? What would you do? What Lancelot chose is below. But make your choice before you scroll down, okay? Noble Lancelot said that he would allow her to make the choice herself. Upon hearing this, she announced that she would be beautiful all the time, because he had respected her enough to let her be in charge of her own life. Now, what is the moral to this story? The moral is, if you don't let a woman have her own way, things are going to get ugly. There was a Packers fan with a really crappy seat at Lambeau. Looking with his binoculars, he spotted an empty seat on the 50-yard line. Thinking to himself, what a waste, he made his way down to the empty seat. When he arrived at the seat, he asked the man sitting next to it, "Is this seat taken?" The man replied, "This was my wife's seat. She passed away. She was a big Packers fan." The other man replied, "I'm so sorry to hear of your loss. May I ask why you didn't give the ticket to a friend or a relative?" The man replied, "They're all at the funeral." A man was driving along the highway and saw a rabbit hopping across the middle of the road. He swerved to avoid hitting the rabbit, but unfortunately, the rabbit jumped in front of the car and was hit. The driver, being a sensitive man as well as an animal lover, pulled over to the side of the road and got out to see what had become of the rabbit. Much to his dismay, the rabbit was dead. The driver felt so awful he began to cry. A woman driving down the highway saw the man crying on the side of the road and pulled over. She stepped out of her car and asked the man what was wrong. "I feel terrible," he explained. "I accidentally hit this rabbit and killed it." The woman told the man not to worry. She knew what to do. She went to her car trunk and pulled out a spray can. She walked over to the limp, dead rabbit and sprayed the contents of the can onto the rabbit. Miraculously, the rabbit came to life, jumped up, waved its paw at the two humans, and hopped down the road. 50 feet away, the rabbit stopped, turned around, waved at the two again, hopped down the road another 50 feet, turned, waved, and hopped another 50 feet. The man was stunned. He couldn't figure out what substance could be in the woman's spray can. He ran over to the woman and demanded, "What was in your spray can? What did you spray onto that rabbit?" The woman turned the can around so that the man could read the label. It said, "Hairspray restores life to dead hair, adds permanent wave." A fellow stopped at a rural gas station, and after filling his tank, he paid the bill and bought a soft drink. He stood by his car to drink his cola, and he watched a couple of men working along the roadside. One man would dig a hole 2 or 3 feet deep and then move on. The other man came along behind and filled in the hole. While one was digging a new hole, the other was about 25 feet behind, filling in the old. The men worked right past the fellow with the soft drink and went on down the road. "I can't stand this," said the man, tossing the can in a trash container and heading down the road toward the men. Hold it," he said to the men. "Can you tell me what's going on here with this digging?" "Well, we work for the county government," one of the men said. "But one of you is digging a hole and the other is filling it up. You're not accomplishing anything. Aren't you wasting the county's money?" "You don't understand, mister," one of the men said, leaning on his shovel and wiping his brow. "Normally there's 3 of us, me, Rodney, and Mike. I dig the hole, Rodney sticks in the tree, and Mike here puts the dirt back." "Yeah," piped up Mike. "Now, just because Rodney's sick, that doesn't mean we can't work, does it?"